Martha and I lived our whole lives in Texas until about, 13 plus years ago. I grew up in Houston, she grew up in San Antonio. And Houston is not unlike Florida. We have seasons there. The not so hot, the hot, the very hot and wet, the hot and very wet, and then it starts all over again, which is, you all have experienced that. So when Martha and I, we moved up to the north, to the Midwest. And we lived, first of all, we lived in Iowa and then in Chicago. And while we were there, we were enchanted by the seasons. We arrived in August, and it seemed like in Houston, it was the spring. And then fall came with the changing of colors and the leaves, and it was just amazing. And the winter and the cold and the snow, it was unlike anything we'd ever experienced. People thought we were crazy because we liked it. I mean, all the people in the Midwest hated it, but we loved it. Even the shoveling of the snow and wearing layers of clothing and buying scarves and winter hats, we just really got into it. To us, it was just a real adventure. And then came spring. And one of the things I noticed was that everyone who'd been staying in their homes during winter spilled out joyously everywhere, as if stones had been rolled from in front of the tombs of their homes, letting them out. I mean, everybody was outside in the spring. It's like a celebration was going on. In our little neighborhood, everybody was out doing something, whether it be walking or biking or cleaning their gardens, finally taking down their Christmas lights, all the things that you do in the springtime in the Midwest. There was just nothing to compare it to from our experiences in Texas. I mean, just like here, there's staying inside with the air conditioning or going outside and coming back in for the air conditioning. It wasn't like people stay outside in droves down here, or in Houston for that matter. It was a different experience for us. As if, people just appeared like they were partying outside of their homes. Spring to us, we became so mindful of it when we were there. And it really affirmed for me something I had known but really never fully experienced, that spring really does feel like a time of celebration in the Midwest. It's a tangible expression of hope. And maybe that's one of the reasons we have so many holidays and holy days happening this time of year. With Passover, when the Jews celebrate their escape from slavery in Egypt. And Ostara, when pagans celebrate the season's change from dark winter to brightening spring with the occurrence of the spring equinox. And Holi, the festival of colors. If you haven't experienced it, I've been to one. It's fabulous. People spew powdered colors all over the place. You can see there's a person there. It's to celebrate the victory of good over evil, the arrival of spring, people play and they forget and forgive and repair broken relationships. It's just an amazing festival. And spring also is dedicated to a lot of mother goddesses in a number of different religions. Besides Ostara, Isis, Aphrodite, the Virgin Mary. Many believe the goddess shows herself in the blossoms, the leaves and the trees, the sprouting crops, the birth of young animals. In the agricultural cycle, spring is a time of planting. Spring is also a time when many of us feel hope, reassurance at the visible evidence that life will continue. We've created days to recognize that. Earth Day, for instance, celebrating the planet we live on. And April Fool's Day, a time of joy and joking and practical jokes. Well, I'm not one necessarily. Martha pointed this out to me just yesterday. I don't usually do practical jokes, but I do tell jokes occasionally. And I did find out that telling jokes was actually part of April Fool's. If April 1st happened on the same day as Easter, the Catholic and Orthodox churches would encourage people to tell jokes and laugh. It was called risus paschalis. And priests would say to the congregations, what's the latest joke? So I'm going to tell you a couple of jokes. Why did the Unitarian Universalist cross the road? To support the chicken in his search for his own path. How does a Unitarian Universalist walk on water? She waits until winter. One more, I know. A little Unitarian Universalist girl was sitting on the curb in front of her house. She had this really sad look on her face. And this older lady who was walking down the street came up to her and said, "Oh, what's going on? Are you okay?" And the girl said, "Oh, my cat's died. My beautiful little kitty cat's died." And the woman was just trying to be helpful, and she said to the little girl, "Well, I know you're sad, but right now your kitty cat is with Jesus." And the girl made a face and then said, "What would Jesus want with a dead cat?" But the thing is, really, many Unitarian Universalists don't talk about Easter. I don't hear a lot of Unitarians talk about it. They talk about Christmas, but not Easter. Easter is considered a Christian holy day in the mythology that we were all taught. And if we weren't taught, we certainly heard about it because it's in the culture around us. We live in a Western Christian culture. And Easter is the dominant myth in that culture. I want to define myth just because I think it's important as we continue. It's a traditional story, especially one concerning an early history of a people or explaining some phenomenon, and typically involves like supernatural beings or supernatural events. We think about that in Easter for a moment. The mythopoetic story of Easter. Before we can really understand it, we need to look at what the Bible tells us before what happened on that Easter day. The Bible, the Christian Bible, tells us that there was this young man, probably late 20s, who was walking around talking to people, using parables and metaphor. This young man most probably lived a couple of thousand years ago. And his name was Jesus. And his life and his teachings grounded a religion that grew up about him. It wasn't a religion that he created. It was a religion that grew up after him. And this religion developed stories about him, some of which became myths. And when he was first born, there's the birth narrative a myth with angels and shepherds and foreign kings and virgin birth and a star pointing to a manger. And at the end of his life, there's the mythopoetic story of a man getting crucified, dying, being put in a tomb. The stone rolled in front of the tomb. And on the Sabbath day, some of his followers, including Mary Magdalene, found the stone had been rolled away from the tomb's entrance. And later, Jesus' followers see him as if resurrected. A supernatural miracle. And this miracle drew many people of the time to Christianity. And later, much later, after Jesus' death, a doctrine was developed about his death. A doctrine that said that his death relieved his followers of their sins, particularly the original sin of Adam. You know Adam, he was the Judeo-Christian origin story you've heard so many times. He and Eve ate the apple when God told them not to. Thus, Jesus is perceived to have opened the door for his followers, now free of sin, a door to an afterlife with their God. In the blog, Patheos Pagan. Now, Patheos is a blog I'd recommend. It has from different religious perspectives, and there are many writers, and they all have different perspectives. But this one is from Patheos Pagan, a writer named John Beckett. And he wrote, "I prefer the traditional Unitarian view that it is better to follow Jesus, his parables, his teachings, model his behavior, than to worship him. Still, 2 billion Christians aren't categorically wrong. There can be value in worshiping Jesus as a God and honoring him as a teacher. But let's draw a sharp, bright line between worshiping Jesus as one God among many and accepting the exclusionist doctrines and theology about Jesus made up by men long after he was gone from the world." Beckett goes on to say, so what can we take away from the Easter story? It's not a story of sacrifice. Sacrifice is an acknowledgement of the reality and necessity of hard truths. Jesus' death wasn't a sacrifice. It was a brutal, state-sanctioned murder. Jesus didn't die for your sins or for anyone else's sins. That doctrine is a doctrine of substitutionary atonement. And it is a relic of a hierarchical, barbaric worldview that persists even today in our time, in honor killings. The message of Easter, at least for Beckett here, is that death is not the end, and that the grave is merely a way station en route to the next world. And that's a message that he says is worth affirming in any religious tradition. I offer this blog post for a different perspective on Easter than the one that we're commonly taught in our Western culture. And there are a couple of ideas that might appeal or resonate with some Unitarian Universalists. One, that Jesus' life and teachings are one way to live a spiritual, fulfilling spiritual life that has worth and value and meaning. And maybe too, that the death of Jesus is not really important. The crucifixion, the Easter story may not be that important, except as to understand death is just an ongoing part of the journey of existence. And I just want to say this, since I'm talking about pagans for a moment. Do you all know where the term Easter comes from? It's not in the Bible. It comes from the pre-Christian goddess Ostara in England, who was celebrated at the beginning of spring. The only reference to this goddess comes from the writings of Venerable Bede, a British monk who lived in the 7th century. And the word Easter and the celebration of Easter were co-opted by Christians to bring pagans into the faith, the Christian faith. And the various earth-centered celebrations that we have for Easter, with the Easter bunny and eggs and Easter egg hunts and all that, well, it was generally brought to America by Europeans. This is a quote from a journal, American Notes and Queries. In Germany and among the Pennsylvania Germans, toy rabbits or hares made of Canton flannel stuffed with cotton are given as gifts on Easter morning. The children are told that Ostara has laid, that Oster has laid Easter eggs. And the curious idea is explained thus. The hare was originally a bird and was changed into a quadruped by the goddess Ostara. In gratitude to Ostara, the hare exercises its original bird function to lay eggs for the goddess on this festal day. And that's been going on for generations. The Christian myth, let's go back to that for a moment, emphasizes an afterlife with God, and that's a mythopoetic construct that doesn't resonate for many Unitarian Universalists, although it does for some. I mean, we know that everybody believes a little different here. For those who aren't making time here on earth until we get to heaven, is there any meaning in this Easter story for us? I mean, certainly it has its origins in natural phenomenon, like the seasons and the earth revolving around the sun. And in our modern times, we don't tend to experience those things as miraculous. We say it's science. But we're Unitarian Universalists. We're a both-and religion. Perhaps it can be both science and experienced as miraculous. I know many times I have made time during this season to open my heart to seeing the miraculous that happens as life returns in the spring. In the Midwest, I had a particular flower that I looked for, that it would bloom. The weeping heart was called, and it was beautiful, and it was something that I looked to in springtime. Now, I know many of us grew up hunting Easter eggs, painting eggs around our house, dyeing them or painting them. You know, in my house, we had a little bit of a difficulty. My mom and dad would hide the eggs. They'd forget where they put them, and we'd have to find them. And then if we didn't find all of them, well, several days later, we would find them. They'd be smelling up the house. But I always wondered, even at a young age, how that fit with what we went to the Catholic Church to learn. It always was a disconnect. It didn't seem to make sense. And even as I came up to be a Unitarian Universalist, and we do Easter egg hunts for the kids on the on the property, that there's the same disconnect. What does this have to do with our beliefs and the principles and sources? And I've continued to wonder about the meaning of Easter. And what meaning I was passing on to my kids as I continued this tradition of Easter egg hunting and other things that we did at Easter. The Easter baskets and the chocolate bunnies. And what was I teaching them? Is it just vestigial for us? Just something left over from religious observances from our childhood that we're passing on? I wonder what you think or believe about Easter. And maybe in our coffee hour afterward we can talk a little bit about it, or you can share some of your thoughts and beliefs. I want to share a few things. I often see Easter as a time of letting go, of reconciliation, of incorporation. As we listen to all this mythology, as Unitarian Universalists, we take it in as part of our free and responsible search for truth and meaning that we do individually and we do collectively as a body. And we use that, to decide meaning and purpose, to intentionally decide meaning and purpose. And I believe we need to do this for the holy days, the holidays, the rituals, beliefs, the traditions. And we make our decisions about what we do with them intentionally. Letting go of some, reconciling some with others, maybe incorporating some holidays and whole because it feels right to us, either individually or as a collective body. And as we go through this process, we accept and support one another's beliefs, rituals, traditions, as we encourage all of us in our spiritual growth. And collectively as a congregation, I think it's important that we make decisions, not just because it's something we've done, but it's something that is meaningful for us today. Something that we can say something about that holds some purpose, that we can tell someone, this is why we're doing this. This is what it means to us. I think that's what is challenging about being a Unitarian Universalist, because we all come from different places with different beliefs and different ideas and traditions and rituals. And we have to decide together what we'll do here in this congregation. And we accept that there's tension in this that is inherent when a body of people, many of whom who have very different ideas of truth, choose to share a spiritual journey together. As I've wondered about these holidays, holy days, beliefs, rituals, traditions, I have come to believe a couple of things. One is that these behaviors and beliefs and rituals and traditions, we hold them to reinforce a sense of connection with each other. And when our connections are strong, we feel centered and safe in a chaotic, always changing world. And I suppose this year, especially, with so many of us having received our COVID vaccines and once again able to be together physically and together with our loved ones as well, physically, we begin to feel that sense of connection and of interconnection with the web of life that we know is so necessary. We're thirsty for connection, thirsty for hugs and the chance to spend time with each other. I have heard so much that people are spending vast amount of time now as after they get their shots with their loved ones. And I was talking with our religious education parents today, and many of them were saying, we're going away for 6 or 8 weeks this summer just to be with family, just to reconnect, to touch, and to physically be with them again. After a year in quarantine, it almost feels like a miracle that we can be together again. It isn't, of course. It's science. But it feels like a miracle. Like a stone being removed from our tomb of isolation. Unitarian Universalist Reverend Richard Gilbert wrote, "A tomb is no place to stay. When each morning announces our reprieve, and we know we are granted yet another day of living, a tomb is no place to stay when life laughs to welcome to hearts which have been away too long." To me, this year, I'm really feeling the resurrection part of the Easter story. Not so much back from the dead, but with vaccine distribution in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about the resurrection of our lives. We stand in the front of an empty tomb this Easter. In the tomb is our past year, a year of fear, uncertainty, too many deaths, too much loss, and perhaps, at least once in a while, a loss of hope. The vaccine, it feels like, has miraculously rolled the stone, offering us a way to leave that tomb. And now it's incumbent upon us to resurrect ourselves as we step out of quarantine. For a tomb is no place to stay. Have you been changed while you were in your tomb this year? What are you going to resurrect as you exit that space into this season of new growth, of reemergence, of rejuvenated life? What are you going to choose to nurture into existence? And perhaps, what new work have you begun this year that you can now come out and share with the world during this Easter season? Go forth, my friends, and happy Easter.